I haven't heard it.
I got you. I'm recording it.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Right,
Yeah, I spotlighted you. Look at that.
Yeah,
Travis, you're gonna be out of a job here soon, homie.
I'm sure he'll be real unhappy about that. We're hoping some more people could do this kind of stuff. All right, so again, who's been to a church outside of the U.S. before? Any kind of church? Pop has. Davin's in the house tonight, just FYI, right here, trying not to fall asleep. He's had a long day, and I'm sure I'll put him to sleep pretty quickly. All right, Bill has been out of the country and seen it, and Travis. Okay, what countries have you guys been to?
It was in Jamaica.
Jamaica. And what kind of church did you go to?
I don't know. It was weird. I was on my honeymoon and I was on the beach and some guy was walking across and he was selling something. And I got talking, said I was a believer. And he said, "Oh, we'll pick you up and bring you to church on Sunday." And I said, "Okay." And it was a small church. I just seem to remember it was kind of like every other, didn't seem much different than any other church I've been to. But they did ask me to come up and say, you're a visitor, come up and say something. And I was like, I can't remember what I said. Nobody seemed to be too impressed, though.
Yeah. A lot of churches do that in other countries that I've been to. They like, you're the guest and you have to come up and bring greeting. And it's okay if you bring greeting for 5 minutes if you want to.
Yeah, I started telling them how great America was, and they should be glad I was there. No, I didn't say that.
All right, I saw that Barbara said Brazil and Canada, I think. So that's pretty cool. She's obviously off camera and off microphone, so she can't tell us more. But
I'm with Spain, Jamaica, and Mexico.
Spain, Jamaica, and Mexico, all the same kinds of churches?
They were all Protestant churches, and that's about all that sticks out. I've been to some Catholic services too. In Spain, I think.
All right.
Maybe Italy.
Maybe Italy. Okay. All right. Who else has been to different churches outside of the country? Dad, I know that you have. I went to Kenya churches with you. Is that the one you're talking about? Even elsewhere? Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Lori and Roy, nice to have you visiting too. If either of you have been to churches outside of the country, that's what we're talking about right now. Does anybody have anything from those churches that really grabbed hold of you that were different, unique in some way, that taught you something about church or something you hated that they did?
I remember the sermon from the church in Spain because the pastor was from England and he got up as the point. It was an international church, like a English language church. And he made a point for the Americans in the crowd to say, we're going to be preaching from the book of Isaiah. That's right, Isaiah. We had the language first.
That's the one thing that you know. I'm not sure they had the language first. It's not Isaiah or Isaiah in Hebrew, but that's whatever. Say whatever they want.
English started in America.
America. All right, anything stand out? I know, Bill, you said that yours was pretty much reminded you of every other one except for they forced you to come up front and say something.
Yeah.
The freedom to sing and rejoice and dance on stage.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, African church for sure, that's the case. I don't know about many others, but yeah, man, people are moving. People are enjoying life, and they have no problems with a song being 20 minutes long. Dancing the whole time. It's like, oh my gosh, let me sit down. This service should just about be over. Sermon hasn't even started yet. Yeah. All right. Has anybody been to like a service in Germany or Holland or Scotland? Any of those? Speaking of having the language first, Scotland. You'll notice that each of them has a way of so in Scotland, the kerk. How do you spell the other one? Let's see here. Kirche. So this is Holland. This is Scotland. This is Kersach. Germany. You notice anything similar about all those words, including ours?
There's Captain Kirk in it.
That's right, they all have the word Kirk in them. Yes, not Captain Kirk so much, but yes. The word, that word Kirk or Kerk or Kerk or Kerk, it's all the same word. And it comes from this one. You guys know that word?
Kyrios.
Kyrios?
Yeah.
For people shaking their head or saying, I can't really remember. You guys remember the East? Oh, forget East to West. Do you remember the Livgren song, Kansas? Remember Kansas? Kyrie eleison? Kyrie
Oh, yeah.
eleison down the road that I must travel. Remember that?
And yes,
Okay.
remember?
That's it. That's the word Kyrie, which means Lord, right? Kyrios, Lord. So it's one who is possessed by the Lord. It's one who's owned by the Lord. That's where this word comes from that we get this word church from originally. There's another word in the Greek. This is just most of this talk that we're going to do today is going to be a conversation about church health. But I wanted to just get a few basic things down about the church before that. So at least half of this time will just be you talking about what you think makes a church healthy. We're gonna have some conversation about what that looks like. What are your measurements for whether you would leave a church or stay in church or things like that, what it looks like. But there's another word, of course, in Greek. So in Greek, it's let's see, ecclesia. Ecclesia. You've heard of that word before? Or the word ecclesiastes or ecclesial, the ecclesial things and stuff like that. And it comes from this word, ek, and this word, kaleo. Kaleo means called, and ek means out. Right? So it's the called out ones. So it's the ones possessed by the Lord or the ones who are called out. Those are our basic root words. The other main word is kahal. Okay, that's a pretty bad cue, but that's what it is. Kahal, or this, which means assembly. Just means meeting. Okay, it's those that are set apart to meet. If you're going to gathering over there. So if you've ever heard a church called a gathering or something like that, that's where they're getting that. Doesn't have to be a worshiping gathering. Kahal is just any gathering, but they used it for worship as well. So that would be one of the main words. Okay, so those are our words. Set out, called by God, possessed by the Lord, or owned by the Lord. Those are your words in this whole thing. So if you've ever heard the phrase something like, well, I'm a Christian, but I can worship on my own, we're probably missing something. Okay, now granted, I have a little bit of bias, so we can discuss this today. My bias says that, being a pastor and having a full-time job here and getting my money from people who go to church, means that I have to tell you that you should go to church, right? And you should give often and in big ways, even to this Tuesday school, of course. So, let's remove the bias a little bit for a second and remember that these words are biblical words, right? To come together, to gather together. So that word together, which we get to if we start with words like koinonia or fellowship, the gathering together for a particular purpose, okay, to fellowship and to do other things. We're going to determine, based on this church health question, what is it that we're gathering together to do? Have we succeeded if we came and sang a bunch of songs and heard some long-winded guy talk? Right? Have we done church? Is that what a healthy church is? Or is there something more to it? That's all that we're going to be, that's what we're going to be getting to. So there's this other systematic theology thing I want to talk about, and that is the difference between the invisible and the visible church. So the distinction between these two things is invisible is the real church. Okay, and I don't know who they are. Okay, God knows who they are, but I don't. That's the invisible church. The visible church is the one that you can see. It might include a whole bunch of the invisible church, but it might not. So you might have this being the visible church and this being the invisible church, maybe. Okay, now ideally, maybe we would like it to look more like this. The invisible church is here. I'm not trying to make the Death Star or an eyeball or anything like that, but you get the idea here. We're hoping that these people that are in the visible but not really Christians, that they will eventually move into this circle because they're hanging out with us. The problem is that a lot of these people that come into the church hang out with these invisible ones, these Christians in here, and then they immediately take off. Because they're like, I had this idea in my head of what Christians look like, and then I met them, right? And they don't look very much like the Jesus that I thought about, that I knew, right? That's a very unhealthy church. Actually, maybe that's just a church. We're all a little bit unhealthy, no matter what. So, but the goal, of course, is that we be very healthy and that we be attractive so that people out here would go to here, and then they go from here into here. That'd be the hope. Maybe they'd be out here and they become Christians, right? They make it into here. So there's this whole other category, right? So it might be more like this, right? Where there's some Christians that are outside the visible church. I hope that those people are people like in some village in the middle of nowhere. And so there is no available place for them to go to church. But there are some, or people who have been so hurt by the church being here that they're going out here for a little bit of time. They're like, I'm a Christian, I absolutely love Jesus, but I'm not going to church right now. It's painful. I have an idea that it could be great. I'd love to be a part of that, but right now I can't find it. And so I just need some time off. Fair. Okay. If this is for anybody here, this is for the de-churched as well. The unchurched, the de-churched, the people who have left. And some people on the screen are in that category, de-churched. Hurt so bad, they've gone outside of it. All right. So yeah, right. So we have these people here, non-Christians, that they might come hang out with these people. They might hang out with these people. We don't know. They might become saved all by themselves and just remain out here for a while because no one's ever taught them that they should be in here. This is a major problem as we're getting into the church today, is that I think a lot of people are saying, hey, it's okay. As long as you love Jesus, it's okay. And we have this whole category of spiritual but not religious, SB&R, okay, which doesn't necessarily mean Christian but not religious, but it could. There's a lot of people out there who say Christian but not institutional. I don't have anything to do with the institutional church. And I get it. And again, it's some of you and some of my best friends. Okay, obviously, you know that I don't agree. I'm in the church and I think it's really important. But I get it. I've wanted to leave several times myself. And if I wasn't the pastor, there'd be many times when I got up in the morning, I would not go to church. Okay, but they're expecting me to be there. So that's what holds me to it a lot of times. Because honestly, sometimes Christians are jerks, right? Sometimes they hurt us really bad. Sometimes they don't act anything like Jesus, which is what we're talking about here today. Okay. Sometimes they are very sincere and just idiots. Okay, we're going to talk over the next a couple of weeks from now. I think we're going to talk about Christian nationalism, where this ends. You know, that maybe somebody out here found out about the church and they come into the church, and then all they hear is America all the time. All they hear is Republicans. All they hear is pro-life. All they hear is right. And all these things might be great. I'm not going to make an argument right now as to whether America actually is great or pro-life is great or Republicanism is great. But sometimes there's churches that's how they're defined. They are these things. And that's what they think is the most important thing. And so these people who aren't there, they come in here and then of course they go right back out. They want nothing to do with it. By the way, for those of you tuning in right now, there are plenty of churches that don't think any of those things. Right? They don't think America's all that great, or even if they do, they don't think we should be worshiping it. They're not pro-life at all, or they might be pro-life in a different way. They're pro-life, that is, they care about life, but they might not be pro-life when it comes to abortion and things like that. And there's plenty of Democrats right here on the screen. Okay, so none of that has anything to do with all this stuff. I'm just trying to get you the difference between invisible and visible. This is what we want. This is the goal. These people are are coming in here. We don't want this. Okay, does that make sense? Visible and invisible when we talk about that? Just systematic theology categories. So the
Yeah.
reason that they don't want to come in is because the people in here are hypocrites. Another great Greek word, which you probably recognize. Okay, that is, we're hypocrites.
Hey, Jace.
Yeah.
Trip, my buddy Trip said recently when I was talking to him, he was like, yeah, the way, like, because what you're talking about, he's like, yeah, it's similar to like the Dave Matthews Band. Like the music is really great, but then you go to a concert and their fans are just awful. And he was like, that's how a lot of people feel with the whole Jesus guy. It's like, man, I really love Jesus, but like his fan club kind of sucks sometimes. So it's like, I thought that metaphor was helpful.
That's really good. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. All right, so a bunch of Dave Matthews people are here, hypocrites. Right? That is, in Greek, this just means actor. So they were called, it's a fine term. You were just one of the people that was on stage. You were one of the hypocrites. Okay, that is, you're faking it. It's fine if you're intending to fake it. It's not fine when you're in a church. Right? Or you don't think you're faking it, but you just don't act anything like, you don't follow the script that you're supposed to be following. And we all have a script as Christians, right? It's the Bible. And we spent the last year plus talking about hermeneutics and how to interpret it. And we don't have solutions to that. We just have conversations about it. But there are some things that the Bible does call us to, I think. Love, unreserved love, right? Insane generosity, all those beautiful traits. Okay, so the question that I want to ask tonight is, what does it look like? What does a healthy church look like? And I'm talking about an institution, although we can go any direction you want. Those of you who don't like the institutional church, you're probably going to say some things that you don't like right now about it. Fine. Say it. Okay, I think we can all admit it. I, as a pastor, I'm probably going to hear some of the things you say and realize that that's my church too. Right? And I'm in charge. I can make changes. But it's hard to shift a ship. It takes a little while to make that kind of thing happen. And I'm also going to find out that I'm part of the problem. So it's not just, well, if I could just get my people to follow me. The problem is that the pastor is also a huge mess and often a hypocrite and needs to be told these things because he's got his own blinders on. Okay, if pastors would just realize that sometimes it might be very helpful, but we have a lot to learn from people outside, inside, wherever else, the church. So what do you think? What would be a mark of a healthy church or an unhealthy church? Really, this is just, talk to me about the health of the church. What have you seen? Have you experienced unhealthy churches or heard about them? I mean, we talked about the Southern Baptist thing a little while ago for a few minutes. The Catholic scandals in the church. What are the other big things that are happening? Bruxy Cavey, that was one of Josh's buddies. Like, doesn't matter. Mark Driscoll, you remember that fall?
Yeah.
Talk about any of those or more. If you don't know who they are, I'll say more about each of those things.
I think an unhealthy tends to be unhealthy is if a church is so big. I mean, I'm talking thousands of people that you just fall through the cracks. And it may not be unhealthy for everybody, but if you're not somebody who's naturally going to connect and not someone who's, shows up on the radar, you could just be sitting there, show up, you could disappear, and no one ever knew you were there or that you left.
Okay.
I guess the word would be, a term to describe that would be, I don't know, no connection. I mean, you could be in a small church with the same problem.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Good. So you're already nuancing your own statement, which is good. You're thinking it through and you're realizing, is it really just a big church problem? But it does seem stereotypically it is easier to fall through the cracks in a large church. You're right.
Yeah, I was taking a course at Regent one time. The guy was talking about he had been a pastor, he was a missionary, and he was saying when he was doing church building when he was a pastor, he said once we got to, I think he said 500 people, he says we split the church and just tried to grow because it was better having small people and not letting it grow. And I don't know if that's always practical. Might be hard to do, but at the same time, I think there was a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'd always said that too. Now being a pastor of a church of over 1,000.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you come to a church and maybe it's already big. I mean, that could be fixed is the wrong word, but well, you know what I'm saying.
I do. Yeah. And in my church, a lot of people feel unconnected. I've heard that over and over again. There's a core group of a couple hundred that feel very connected. They're involved in things and they're going out of their way to be connected, right? They're involved in Sunday school or small groups. But other people, if they aren't trying really hard, they're gonna fall through the cracks, and we aren't good at keeping up with them.
What do they say? There's the core, the committed, and in the audience, or something like that.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So big might be a problem, might be unhealthy, but not necessarily. So you could say they could be a big church that's doing it well, that feels small, that has small groups and pastors over the small groups. So like little mini churches that all kind of come together on Sunday. It could work that way.
That's a good model. I think that's just fine, you know.
Yeah.
Wonderful, you know.
Yeah, so our church has currently 2 services, one that's rather contemporary, one that's rather traditional. They're kind of 2 churches, but they have the same pastoral care over them. But they probably aren't going to see each other a lot every once in a while, but they go to different services. They're excited about different kinds of things, yet sometimes, again, stereotype, but often.
And that might be, I was going to say real quick, and I'll relinquish the microphone. If I were a pastor going to a big church, I might say, we have 3 services and make them like appeal to different demographics. That might be the way to kind of fix the, you know, the disconnect.
Yep. And still be able to pay for your buildings, for instance, or whatever else.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
I mean, you got to think there are practical things. You know, you've got 3 buildings on a huge campus or something like that. And we want to say, oh, let's cut it down to 300 people. Okay, well, now who's paying for all these buildings? Where the other people are going somewhere else.
Right, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
So there's practical things in here as well as theological. All right, good points. Size of the church.
How about how they respond to sin?
Okay, good. Say more.
Some people will respond with prayer. Others will respond with judgment and pointing fingers and blame and et cetera, et cetera. I don't know.
Okay. In my head, I was going to choose 2 separate ones, but I'll just keep changing until I figure out what's going to look like on the board. Good. So how they respond to sin. That's good. Different. So whether they stop and pray for you, whether they rebuke you, whether they cast out demons, whether they tell the church about you publicly. Yeah. So if you go too far into unhealthy, you're going to have all this, you know, shaming, public shaming, even removing from the church or something like that. Not that that's always bad to remove from the church. I think there is a reason, but you can see it sometimes just like it's so shamed that they just leave. Or maybe sin lists. Okay, where everybody has to say their sins to act like 100%. They have to tell all of their sins to somebody, and they keep account of all of that, knowing those things. That's definitely sociologically cultic. It's a real problem. But you do want people to care about those things, right? How they respond to sins are good. I mean, there should be an accountability, a gentle, caring accountability, but there should be something. And at some point, if that sin has continued and there's no chance at resolution, there's no confession and asking for help, apology, well, at some point they do need to be removed from church, because they're going around telling people that they're Christians, but they're not acting anything like it all the time. So it gives correct Jesus' name and your church's name kind of a bad name. All right.
Yeah, I saw that happen one time. There was a guy who apparently, I didn't know him, but he was basically like a con man and had been basically stealing from people, you know, posing as a contractor or something like that. And I got a letter in the mail. This guy, you know, they said, look, this, you know, don't spread this news, but this guy, if you see him, and we're doing putting him out of the fellowship thing. And the way it was written, it was really handled pretty wisely and pretty maturely. But I've only seen it happen once like that. But apparently it was pretty necessary because this guy was going to people at the church and saying, "Hey, help me, brother," whatever like that. And a few $1,000s later, they realized he was just a thief, you know.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is the job of a shepherd, right?
Yeah.
Of a sheep, is to keep out the wolves.
Yeah.
So if this guy's a wolf and he's coming in there, I mean, you think, well, that seems so rude, but no, it's protecting people.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing. What about, an abuser, a child abuser, a wife abuser? What about someone who has divorced his wife and won't, has no good cause for it, just tired and wants to move on? Is there a reason to say, hey, you are not acting on behalf of Jesus here? This isn't the way Jesus would act.
Right.
And we're asking you to change that. And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do my own thing. And yeah, to protect the church. I think it's a good thing. That's helpful. All right.
So Jay says, part of the reason that I am no longer a pastor and why I currently am in a stage in life where I don't attend church on a regular basis is because I come from an experience of working in an insanely unhealthy church. So I can just, without ranting, share a few, I wrote them down so I don't rant, but a few things that come to mind when I think of my time there. One of the things was a lack of accountability. So the pastor had no accountability. Like the board of elders was the other pastors in the church. So the accountability was just your friends. So that was a problem because when there was an issue, I couldn't go anywhere to complain because the board was the pastor. So there was a lack of accountability. The kind of cult of personality kind of thing that we see happens where churches are built around a specific person. And then when that person does something bad or leaves, the church is decimated because they're no longer there. Churches that are financially motivated can lead to a lot of unhealth. I know we have to pay our bills as a church, but I mean, churches that are primarily financially driven. And then I think the consumeristic model of church is very unhealthy. Yeah.
Okay,
Those are
let's
a
talk
few.
about these. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Josh. What'd you say?
I was going to say I just threw out a few, so I'll stop.
Yeah, let's just talk about them in each one. Because I want there to be discussion. I don't want just me to respond to these things.
Yeah.
So let's talk about them in not the order he said, but top to bottom. Consumeristic. All right. Anybody experience that in church?
What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I'm not sure what.
Go ahead and say, I know what you're thinking, Josh, I'm sure, but
Yeah, so a consumeristic church model is just something that's based off of the way that pastors or the leadership of the church thinks is, okay, we have a product that we're selling, and so how do we sell our product? It's basically taking something like capitalism and applying that to how a church should function. So what do we have to do to get the most amount of butts in seats? The primary goal here is to basically sell out our church. How do we get the most butts in seats? So what do we have to do to create a show that people want to consume?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
it would be all about asking people what they think about stuff and then making sure you meet every one of the needs that they have. Or a primary need to make them come and give money. Yeah. Anyone been in a church like that or thought?
I've never been in church. I know I won't use any names. I know a guy, pretty sure kind of runs a church like that. My sister-in-law went to it and found out both knew of the guy, and she said she had come to him with some issues, and he was like, "Well, I, surveyed our members, and pretty much that most of them like this." And I never thought about it before, but that's basically a consumeristic method. I'm kind of survey everybody likes this, so I'm going with that. And I don't care what you say. And I don't know what the issue was because I wasn't at that church at the time. Never been to that church, but I knew the guy who ran it, and of course I know my sister-in-law. So
yeah,
that's what she said. He just said I did the numbers, and that's how, and I'm rolling with that.
Yep, do all the marketing, figure out what people want.
Yeah, marketing was his big thing. In fact, he was a teacher of mine. I won't say where, and he taught a course. Basically, was kind of on marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think we want to go too far and say all marketing is wrong.
Oh no,
Right.
I mean you got to spread the word. But
In some senses, evangelism is kind of marketing. Or it
well,
can
it is.
be.
Yeah.
So, but if that you get that side, you know, you can kind of tell when it gets a little like,
Right.
this makes me feel icky. When it's less about Jesus and what he's calling us to and sacrifice and those things. And it's more
Right.
about-
It wasn't Josh's word, but basically when Sunday is a show and
Yeah.
not a worship service or something, you know.
And remember, all this is going to be on a continuum, isn't it? So when is something a show and when is something not? Like, my guess is that in my own church, the people who only will go to the traditional service, they won't go to the other one. There's probably a reason. They probably see that other one as too much of a show, maybe too loud. I mean, they're gonna have lots of different reasons, but some of them at least will say, I don't like the show, right? And even the own pastors that I work with, like the stage is way up off the ground. It feels distant, it feels, and they're just like, if there are ways we can make this more holy, more sacred. So even they feel like sometimes it's a show. And they don't want it to be that way. They don't want us to be lofty, exalted, sitting way up high. But they want, like, we're part of this group too. We're just worshipers. We just happen to plan the songs ahead of, you know, it's where does it become like, oh, when you have your first smoke machine in there, has it become a show? Like, or is it 3 smoke machines at the same time it becomes a show? One laser light, one spotlight's okay, but a laser, you know, what's the, and I'm sure you can have an argument for each one of those things. Even the people with lasers and stuff like that might not say, well, we're not a show so much as we're trying to give people an encounter experience. So I want to be careful with condemning one side only and just saying the other side. Like, there's always going to be this movement. And that's what all of this hopefully is always about. What does wisdom look like? What does it look like for you in your particular circumstance? Is this an absolute versus, yeah, like, or is it relative? Does it matter somewhat to the people? I mean, if you put me over in an African church, I think it's very, very haughty sometimes, very upfront, and I don't like it as much. So you put me in a high church, it feels, you know, where they have the robes and all that. That doesn't feel genuine to me either. But also, I don't like the laser lights. Like, I find myself somewhere in the middle, but that middle doesn't make it better.
Right.
It's a preference based on maybe a little bit of theology, but maybe not as much as I really like. If I'm totally honest, it's probably a whole lot more preference than it is.
Yeah, I mean, I love the hymns and stuff, and I'm not a big fan of a lot of contemporary, you know, worship stuff. For me, a lot of it sounds the same. You know, I'm being an old grumpy old guy saying that, you know, or as my stepsister had said, you know, it's some of these songs are just hooray for Jesus. It's like, you know, I'm giving the hymns, but I recognize that that's because I'm almost 60 and it's what I'm used to, you know, growing up, how I did. So
Yeah. You're almost 60. Good gosh, what happened to you, Bill? Man.
you're not that far behind, are you?
You used to be a teenager, and
I
I
know.
looked up to you. Now you're this old
Yeah,
guy.
I'm 59 this year. So no, wait. I'm more 64, so I got a couple more years. Yeah, I'm close.
You're 59. Is that what you said?
No, I'm 58 now.
58. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not anywhere close. Thank you, though, Bill.
You-
You've got almost a decade on me. Just FYI. All right, we're just gonna remember. All right, so yeah, consumeristic. Maybe go right down to the finance driven, because we're kind of talking about that at the same time, right? It's put people in the pews and put money in the bank. Make sure that pastors can have, I mean, one extreme is make sure they can have their own jet, right? Or the right sneakers and preachers and sneakers. But at what point does it become a problem? Like, my sneakers are about $45. That's reasonable. But what if I bought a $150 pair? Does that become unreasonable? Now preachers shouldn't be doing it? What if it's $600? Now,
Jace,
what if, yeah,
when you get a little older, you're gonna put a little more money in your shoes. I'm just gonna tell you.
that's right.
You'll have to repent for your statements tonight.
Well, I didn't say anything negative. I'm saying, yeah, where does it go? Right? Yeah, I buy the cheapest stuff because I'm a cheapskate, but it doesn't have anything to do with my holiness. I don't think.
I agree.
I think
Right.
I think it's easy to pick stuff out that like we don't purchase ourselves, and like, you know, different people spend different money. They spend their money differently.
That's
And
right.
I think there's something that like I used to catch myself doing, and I try not to do it anymore. And I think I've gotten a lot better at it. Where it's like, well, why are they spending their money on whatever insert a thing? Because I don't like things, generally speaking. I'm much more minimalist. But I spend my money on travel and going and doing things. So like we just spend our money on different things.
So, but what Josh was saying is finance driven. Like that's the whole motivation behind the church is making more money. Or a major factor in it.
So the church that I worked at literally would like launder money through a different organization that was associated with the church. So they would bring money in, send it through one organization, and then redonate it back to the church so that it was all like tax-free and looked different. So they did sketchy stuff like that. And they're not the only churches that do that. Like that is, they would use the church to launder money. Like that is illegal. Not only is it immoral, it's illegal. Or like maybe a less extreme example, like on the news recently, there was a pastor who was just robbed during preaching of $1 million worth of jewelry. Why are you, as a pastor, have $1 million worth of jewelry when you're preaching? That's what I'm talking about. Or in my personal experience, my friend, I won't use their name because they don't have the permission, but they worked with me. They were a father with 4 kids. Mom didn't work. They were living in like a 2-bedroom apartment, barely scraping by. My wife and I were living in a tiny little house, barely scraping by, trying to decide, do we pay the light bill? Do we pay our student loans? What do we do? Meanwhile, the head pastor is living in a $1.8 million mansion in a gated community with personal chefs and all this kind of stuff. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's an issue. What do you do with that? That's more common than that, unfortunately. Like, what do you do with it?
So to quote the Supreme Court on, you know, I can't give you a definition of what pornography is, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah, that's a good, I like it, Travis.
Or like we can all argue like pedophilia is wrong, and maybe like, well, but what age? And maybe there's a gray area there for some people, but most people agree like the general concept is wrong. So like there's a certain like, yeah, we agree this is wrong, but the details, sure, maybe there's a gray area at some point, but
Yeah. So, I mean, you can imagine that a pastor who lives in a $1.8 million home, he might be preaching to people who all live in $1.8 million homes too, right? It probably wouldn't serve his congregation a whole lot to be in a $200,000 home. Maybe, like there might be reasons for such things. So it's not just that by itself that is the wrong thing, especially if he's living in San Francisco. Pretty much his shack is going to be $1.8 million. But I think Travis's point is exactly right. Right? I mean, we all know that there's some spot. But the reality is, like, I make a very good salary. I'm perfectly happy with it. There are probably people in my congregation that make way less than me, not many, because it's a rather well-off church. But do I need to be like, am I sinning by not giving them a whole bunch of my money? I don't know. Like where, you know, the homeless people who walk by my church every day, am I supposed to be giving them $20 every time I see them?
or are you all sinning by not helping the people that are less fortunate than all of you?
Yeah. Although, like everybody is, so they're all helping in some ways, but since it's all about like, where's that? Like every house I go in, I'm covet. Every house, almost everybody in the congregation I've gone on, I'm coveting their house. I'm like, man, how come you have all this and I have hardly anything compared to you? Oh, no, they worked hard for that, and they're, you know, and most of them are using it well. They're having me into their home and feeding me. Like, I just want to always find that balance, right? Again, the continuum. It's this Is there a reason to have a jet? Maybe. I don't know what it is, but are they constantly going back and forth to other countries where they're evangelizing? Going in there and supplying funds for people? Okay, well, maybe it's a good idea to have it. But like you said, we all know it when we see it, or we at least have an idea that there's a problem with finance driven.
I think one possible starting point you can apply is when the Bible says, let him who has two give to the one who has none. You know,
Yeah,
I've always said, because I've been in situations where I've been sitting in the pew next to somebody who's cranking in the dollars when I was broke. And I always thought, and listen to them talk or brag about something, I thought, if you're making enough money to support 3 families and all you're doing with your money is taking care of yourself, well, you know, when you get before the judgment seat of Christ, you can talk to Jesus about, you know, what you did with what you had, because if I'm making enough money to take care of me, put away money for the future, all that, and I got enough to do it 3 times over, and I'm not doing anything to help anybody, I think I got some explaining to do when I see Jesus.
Yeah.
No, and I don't, and of course, in some areas there's just so much income and there's so much wealth. It's like in the DC area where we used to live and I live now. I mean, I'm not a rich man, but the fortunate thing for me is there's always opportunity because there's lots of people around, and so I'm in an economically buoyed area. But there's some places, other countries or other places where everybody's broke. So it's hard to apply that depending on the percentage of people that might be at disadvantage.
So the only thing I would add to what you just said is, it's not just you have enough money to take care of 3 families and you're not giving any of it away. I would say if you have enough money to take care of your family and you're not giving anything away, it's still a problem. If you're not being sacrificially generous, then it's a problem. And I think churches, the same thing is true. Like,
I agree with that. I just didn't want
sometimes
to
be giving away more than we think is even reasonable.
Yeah.
Because we're that kind of that's the, I mean, isn't that Jesus, right, on the cross? Like, I'll give it all away.
I think so. Yeah.
But you've got to figure out that balance, because we don't want to be asking people who have no money at all to be giving, half of their income into the church so that their kids can't live. Like, we've got to be looking at this stuff. But I think, like everybody said, finance driven is a problem. Okay, accountability. People have no accountability. We've seen that in churches all over the place. In fact,
that was Driscoll's main problem.
Yeah.
He had many, but that was a big one. There was no accountability.
Both of those, right? Accountability and personality.
Yep.
It was so personality driven that nobody could really hold him accountable, because he was the draw of the church. He was everything. And he was right about everything. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of churches have boards that advise them, but without any real accountability, that can stop them. So even the Bible says stuff about having a plurality of elders, having other leaders, not just one.
Was he the guy? I'm sorry, Driscoll, because I think my brother was telling me some story about it. Was probably him. Was he the guy that when someone said you need to be accountable to someone? How about that guy? And he says, I can't be accountable to him because his church is smaller than mine or something. Was that him? Or
that is him, yes.
Okay, right. Okay, all right. Yeah.
Yeah. He also said I couldn't follow Jesus if he was weak. So he must have been able to whip. He must have been able to whip people. Like, if I'm stronger than Jesus, I can't follow him. I was just like, well, he's probably stronger than Jesus. He wasn't out there at the gym on a regular basis or anything. He definitely wasn't watching MMA. So, like Mark Driscoll did.
Yeah, Driscoll, that's another thing. There was like a whole layer of like a very toxic understanding of what it means to be a male that was like kind of baked into a lot of Driscoll's theology that caused a lot of issues in people's marriages in the church. Women were treated very, very poorly. That's another sign of an unhealthy church. I think if women are being, even if, we don't have to argue about complementarian or egalitarian, I think there are complementarian.
Well, complementarianism. Complementarianism. Yeah, women, patriarchy.
Right.
Yeah, I agree it's bad, but I wasn't trying to make that theological argument, but I am, Yes, I would say that patriarchy and the subjugation of women is a major issue.
Yeah. But could you go to a church that is healthy, that has complementarian views? Lori might not be able to, although she did for quite a while.
Yes,
I know
but not
the church.
anymore. No.
Right. But I don't know if you would see it this way, Lori, but I don't feel like that church was overly unhealthy because of their views on that. Maybe there was some lack of health. I mean, we all have to think, like, we hadn't figured it out yet. We hadn't learned that that women have equal authority. But
Right. No, I
don't feel like
didn't
they were treated
feel,
poorly.
yeah, I didn't feel that it was overtly abusive or anything like that. But I also saw elders that only read people that in my opinion, are unhealthy leaders in the church that are authors also. So their viewpoint was skewed by people that are not healthy as far as I'm concerned, spiritually.
Good. So there's probably another a really important thing on there is to who you read, right? On that list, or who you put around you, or the kind of people you listen to. Do you listen to people who disagree with you? Have you allowed yourself to have other people feed into you? And I would have said for most of my life, no, you don't let people speak into your life who disagree. Right? I wouldn't have said it straight out like that, but I didn't read anybody who was outside of my safe worldview. It took somebody in my life saying it's okay to read those people that I respected for me to just kind of pick up that first book and go, okay, maybe I'll just, and they're like, oh, this isn't all that bad.
Okay, so we're talking about healthy and unhealthy churches.
Yeah.
We probably have all been to an unhealthy church. Have any of us been to a healthy church? What does that look like?
All right, yeah, let's emphasize that for a few minutes. That's a good idea. So have you been to a healthy church? Again, thinking continuum, right? So I would honestly, all of my churches had problems, but I'm not sure that I would have called any of them unhealthy. It all depends on what you mean, like where on the continuum that we are in regard to certain things. My current church has almost no diversity in it. Okay, I think that's a sign of unhealth. That's a sad thing, but it's also a kind of normal thing. Like, people like to worship with their particular culture or race or things like that. So it's not like it should be, but is that a definition of unhealth? I don't know. Oh, good, someone else. Yeah. What's health? What does your healthy church look like?
Well, I've been going to this small church the last year, and because it's small, the pastor is not he's not an egomaniac, and I really just in my heart feel like he loves the Lord, he loves people. He just seems like a real good guy. You just sense that, and I don't know. There just seems like a lot of unity there. I haven't run into any so far. I haven't run into any people that are super difficult, or bitching or complaining or whatever like that. So yeah.
Okay. So unity is a major
Yeah.
factor in it being
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah, like I heard somebody say once, if you find the perfect church, don't join it because you'll ruin it. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but so far it's been nice. It's been, because where I was before, there was like an A list and a B list, and I was on the B list, and it was kind of made clear to a lot of people, hey, you're not really one of the desired people, so to speak. You're not gonna get to serve whatever like that. And that church kind of was falling apart when I got there anyway. But this place isn't like that, And can I just make one other quick comment?
Yeah.
Something that I've noticed, at least the places that I've been, if you go in and the worship team doesn't seem super professional, sometimes that's a good sign that the heart of the Lord is there, because when it's super polished and you got to have multiple layer auditions just to try to get in, it might there might be the wrong attitude. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not on
Okay.
the worship team, but
So let's emphasize it might be.
right,
I-
might be exactly. I know the Lord. You got to be able to sing to be on the worship team. I'm just saying. There's
So
you got to
let's-
somebody in charge has to say you're tone deaf. It doesn't work. I get that, but there's a difference between perfect, polished. America's got stage ready, and because it's like, well, that's all that matters. The show. I guess I'm talking about the show there. And we don't. And my church doesn't have that attitude so far. There's no. This is a show, and I help run the sound, and I've made mistakes, had a feedback pop up once in a while, and no one's ever come and said, "Bill, we can't have that happen again ever." It's never. There's no one ever talks to anybody like that.
Yeah.
We feel like we're all there just for the same reason. So far, yeah.
I think the sign of a healthy church is you have community that cares for each other without uniformity of belief.
I can go with that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Community that cares for each other without uniformity of belief.
Which implies that open communication is the norm in the freedom and the ability to openly communicate.
Yeah.
Because you got to talk about what you don't agree with each other on.
As being allowed to ask difficult questions, or controversial questions without being judged.
Right.
Right. And still being allowed to be there, be present, be a part of the community, even though you disagree with leadership or whatever else. Yeah. That's good.
And like a space to actually have that discussion where you can actually ask those questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And
a
the
big-
leadership, I think the leadership not being dogmatic about this is what this scripture says. And it's plain and it's obvious and this is what it means. You know what I mean? Being so certain. And I don't know, Jace, how do you handle that being a leader and being the leader in the church, but showing that there might be more interpretations of a scripture? Do you know? I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself well.
Yeah, sure you are. Yeah. So depending on whether I'm in a classroom or in a sermon is going to depend on how I do that. But like in a classroom, I'll show all the different views. In a sermon, I might just sideline one of the views. Like so, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking about the church and its relationship to. I've preached this in every church that I've been in. It's this same one. If you've been in my churches, you've heard this before. But it's crying out to the demons, right? It's Ephesians 3:10, that the powers in the universe would know that God is manifoldly wise because of the church. So I'll say something in there like, whether you think that demons are, based on our last week thing, right? Whether you think they're actual entities that fly around with swords and horns, things like that, or you think this is just the dark forces inside of your heart and your mind, the point is the same, that we're crying out against this evil in the world, right? So that's the way I do it. I'm constantly giving a couple of ideas, but then going to the main point that I'm trying to get to. And sometimes I'll tell them, here's what I think. But honestly, there's a lot of atonement theories out there that I'm wrestling with. Like, I'm kind of still stuck in this spot. Maybe I've got blinders on, but here's how I understand it right now. But here's the main point I'm trying to get to in this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if you ever say what you actually think, it's like that, where you say, but I'm wrestling with it. And then more often than not, you don't say what you think, but you do usually say, I feel like this, like I lean this way, but I could be wrong or something like that.
yeah, I have a few things that I pound the pulpit on.
And Jace is willing to just not give answers that often too, and like let people actually think about it for themselves, or to imply an answer, and does a good job using Socratic method, just asking questions is another thing you do.
but I don't want people to ever think that there aren't actual answers to some of these things. Like there are sometimes absolute answers. There is a black and white answer. I don't necessarily know it, but as a preacher of the gospel, there are some things that I feel I must pound the pulpit on, right? I must say things like Jesus died and he died for mankind. Like we can get into the nuances of what does it mean to die for mankind? In what way did he die? How's the atonement work? What does the blood actually cover? All those things. But I want to make sure that people hear Jesus is absolutely king over every part of our lives. You know, there's some things that are really strong that I'm not going to, I don't think I'm going to skirt around. I'm going to try to say it really, really boldly. But the other things I get a little bit of for. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is a healthy church has a little bit of humility. Or maybe a lot of humility. What did you say? Do you want to add? Davin said something about what Bill was saying.
Bill had a comment on like churches not being super always perfectly organized and stuff.
Yeah.
So when you come on some Sunday mornings and you're like, I don't know what I'm talking about. Let me or like someone's like, is it your turn or your turn? Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like that more than everything being.
Oh, that's good. Because I always feel incredibly stupid when that happens.
It's kind of like, okay, good. We're not everything is rehearsed to the T.
Yeah. Although it's all scripted in our church. Like I know everything that's supposed to happen in order. I just forget between reading it and walking on the stage what's next. Because I'm thinking of something else. But I'm glad that looks good. To me, it makes me feel like an idiot.
How about how children fit in with the church?
Oh, good one.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Okay,
do you
keep going.
welcome them? Do you sequester them? Do you let them be a part of their service? I mean, my church just had this awesome Sunday after our Bible study thing that they did. And the children ran the entire service down to the part where the children's pastor gave the sermon and they helped, which was crazy fun for everyone. So.
Yeah, I love that.
That's cool.
Yeah. We definitely don't do that very much, but we have children's choirs that'll come on sometimes. We might have like a teenager read or something. But it does become harder when you become a bigger church. Like, okay, well, we can only include 4 people. Like, what are we gonna do? Like, not even all the pastors in our church are up there every week. So, yeah, that'd be good once a year or something like that. What was that? A youth service, yeah. Which shows that we care about the youth. But there's other ways to show we care about the youth, but that's a good way. But the big emphasis here is that we care about the next generation and not just about the tithers, I guess. That's good. That's helpful.
Yeah, so that's actually a really, and Jace, I think you do a very good job of including families and children. Sometimes you've even forgotten to excuse the kids, but even when you do remember, you're always like, they don't have to leave. They're welcome here. And, you know, I've even heard you say it's okay if they make noise or move around, you know, because it shows life. So I think that's really important.
Listen, my kids never wanted to leave when Jace was preaching. They were always like in the front row squirming around. So he's really great.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I wanted the Steiner sisters shenanigans to go, but I didn't tell them specifically. Kidding. Your kids are my favorite, of course. You know that.
Sounds like you need a director, so you have that thing in your ear. Okay, Jace, now it's time to do this. Like the news people have, you know.
That would be good. I would like that. Right? No, send the kids out. Send the kids out before you start preaching. Okay, got it.
I'm sorry.
So we always have a example in church of the church in the New Testament that gave away everything.
Good, yeah.
That was great for them. It may be quite different in this world that we live in now. I'm leaving that open. I'm curious.
So the question, like, when it comes to generosity and giving away everything versus giving away something. Yeah. So a healthy church is one that is healthy with its finances, somehow like that. Is that what you're?
Right.
Yeah. And what does that look like? Does that look like 100% of the people are giving 10% of their income?
Yeah.
That would be great.
Although 10% would be way too little for some people.
Well, I think like if you think of it in the cultural context of the day, when it says, and you're thinking of like where they held all their property in common and shared everything together. I mean, you're talking about an agrarian society where they're basically growing food to take care of themselves.
Right.
So it's a very different society than like where if we were to have everything in common today, yeah, like it doesn't exactly translate necessarily. But yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about.
We've also looked at all of these different groups, men, women, children. What about the old? The old are going through a really different process in this time and age than ever before. They're getting older and they're living longer and they're not having their health and they're going to homes, things like that.
Like Bill's almost there. Yeah.
Yeah, Bill's close.
Hey.
Hey, that's all right. I'm catching up to you, Bill.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, how do we treat, like, as Americans, we are generally pretty darn bad at how we treat the old. Right? Most other societies that are honor shame culture societies, you know, the old are still respected when they're 98 years old. They're not getting around very well, but they, you know, as long as they're still able to talk and they're still running things, it doesn't automatically go to the 40-year-old who's in there.
Yeah.
And the church should be thinking about that too. Not that everyone in church leadership should be 90 years old, but
That's true.
how do we treat our elders and how do we treat those who aren't able to come anymore, the homebound? Yeah.
And we also have mixed with that the money thing. So I can live without working now, quote, but it may cost me $5 million to live the last 10 years of my life. What do you do with that? How much do you give away? How much do you keep? It's such a big balance. Where's the faith?
Yeah. 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 And healthy church should be figuring out how to speak into that. How to, I mean, hopefully just give you wisdom as an individual on how to do that. But generally it's someone like you who's thinking about this coming to someone like me who doesn't. Like, that's never on my mind because I haven't reached that stage in my life that this is a consideration. But are there things that we can do for people in the category in the 80s and 90s? Besides just, you know, our church is getting ready to do a financial thing for our older people, right? And of course, part of that, hopefully part of that is we want to teach you how to use your money well. We don't want you to be taken advantage of. There are ways that you can do this, but also, of course, for the church, it benefits them. Like, you know, if you give this money to your church before a certain time, then you don't have to pay taxes, blah, 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 blah. So all that stuff is in there. And I know that's probably not originally what you were saying. So, but how we care for old, how we care for them, and money is a part of that.
Yeah,
So then you come down to the widows and widowers.
Yeah, the widows and widowers. Yeah, exactly. And that's another category too, not just old, right? But how do we treat single, especially single women, which is one of my main concerns, having been out there talking to so many over the last 5 years, 6 years. Yeah, how do they survive? And they have this scarlet letter and they've done nothing usually. I mean, everyone's done something, but there's no guilt in these things. How do we treat them? Because they feel guilty just going to church by themselves. So sorry, I went off on that rant. Josh, I think I might have jumped in on you. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I just wanted to comment because I think the elderly thing is actually a space where the church has a unique opportunity to speak into culture, specifically in this country. I'm just speaking from my context, because in America, in our society, like, we are intentionally pushed away from things like the elderly and the sick. Like, they don't show that on commercials unless you're watching like a channel that just old people watch. But like billboards, we're always being sold products to look younger and like to up our like all this kind of stuff. And so constantly culture is saying, like, you need to look younger, you need to be sexy, you need to be this, you need to be that. And then the church just has kind of adopted that as well. Like, I know the church likes to pretend that, oh, we're not influenced by culture, but that is words that I can only say when we're all not recording.
That's
5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. So I just think it's a unique, I don't know. I just wanted to comment on that, that I thought that was a really good point. And I think the church is in a unique opportunity to serve the elderly and the sick and the disabled within our community that often get, pushed to the side. The church has a unique ability to do that if they're willing to tap into it.
Yeah.
I would expand on that too and say, like, the church, like, I think what it is that why the elderly get neglected, right? Like, let's just use the N word, neglected, is we in the West have moved away from kinship bonds and gone to nuclear families where it's just all about me and my own children and my spouse. And we move away from our families. And whereas like you were talking about honor shame cultures, it's not so much the honor shame thing, it's that they still have, they have extended kinship units as opposed to nuclear families in those countries. And so the church could be and should be maybe that extended family, right? Like, isn't that what we think of the church a lot of the time, is like to fill that void? Yeah.
Yeah, good.
I agree. I think you're onto something there, especially since, like you were saying, because I thought about a lot. We're not in an agrarian society where it's easier to kind of share with the, I guess it's the industrial, the technological revolutions and the way things are. It tends to isolate people, age, economics, and so forth. So, there's an opening there to spread out.
Yeah. So a lot of things that we could be doing.
Yeah, yeah. We're biting off a lot here.
Yeah, and you guys have mentioned a lot of good ones that, like, I feel like I should write all these things down and conquer all of them. But like, you can't. How do you do
Well,
all
you're young. You got lots of time. Don't worry. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said, Josh, about that honor and shame again and kinship. Kind of, that was good. Whoever talked about that, Travis, I guess. Yeah. All right, so this is our final 3 minutes. So a healthy church looks like all of these things that we've mentioned and all these things that we've said no to, right? All of this on some sort of a continuum, because health looks a little bit different depending on who you are, just like your own body, right? If all of us were to get scanned, we would find all kinds of things that are wrong with us, but they're perfectly normal for us. So some churches might look better in this light, it wouldn't look good in my church or something like that. So yeah, there's some of that. Okay. In this, we emphasize a lot of specific things.
All right.
Maybe I just want to say in our last
Good
couple,
evening, everyone. Unless you're watching this later,
we just got that.
it could be morning or
Somehow
afternoon.
my
Nice to see you
Facebook Live just went on.
on Zoom.
Right, just the right time.
and maybe a few people on Facebook Live. So I was going on.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So character, right? A church of character. We think a lot about competency, right? Is the church doing a good job? Is it accomplishing this? But a church of character, I think, is really what we want. We want authentic, real, trying to love God and love people. And it's going to look different in all kinds of different scenarios. But as was already said, right, we know when it doesn't look like it's loving. But I want to be careful throughout this whole thing to remind people that just because you think it's not loving doesn't mean it's not loving. Right? There might be some things that pastors, that leaders, that churches and as institutions need to do that might not feel loving to everybody, and even some of you. And that doesn't automatically mean you've got it figured out, and therefore you should leave the church.
Well, but then that leads to a discussion for like a whole other night about like maybe we shouldn't have institutions and we should have communities instead of having institutions, because institutions come with baggage.
So what community doesn't come with baggage? That institution does come with baggage. What? Tell me the difference between that.
Well,
Maybe I just
what-
don't understand your word institution.
Well, I guess what are the rules that you're talking about institutions need to do, that leaders need to do to make sure that happen? And like, what is it that you're referring to?
I'm in that last sentence, I was just saying character. Like, I wasn't talking about all the competency and things like that. I'm just saying if a church just has character.
So here's what I imagine is I imagine when you get big enough and you have to manage different sets of people, then you do certain things to protect one group of people from another group of people. Whereas in a smaller community, they'll actually talk to each other and interact with each other and grow together instead of sheltering them from each other.
But can you imagine a church that is an institution and is somewhat large? Could they do that? Is it the problem with institutional and size that's the problem, or is it something else? Yes, it might be more prone to it, I guess.
Right.
But is it possible for me to lead a 1,250 person church, as I'm doing, and still have the things you're talking about, still bring health? Or is it just impossible because it's an institution? Is that what you think? Granted, my church is not all healthy, so for sure.
I think it's possible, but I think the institution is going to fight back. And
what does that mean? What is the institution that's going to fight back?
Like the prone to do it, or whatever the words that you use. Like, I think the tendency that prone to is there's a desire to preserve the institution once it gets to a certain size. And the desire to preserve the institution will sometimes get prioritized over other things.
Sometimes it might. That's right.
And that's the tendency that causes the issue. So that's where you need to have safeguards in place as much as possible to eliminate that or check that.
Accountability.
Right. But I think a lot of it's not just, I mean, I think connectional systems are a great and like step up from non-connectional systems, but even like independent oversight from outside of your actual institution would be even better. If we'd be actually willing to submit ourselves and be humble to say, it's okay to have somebody who's not a part of our institution be a check and balance potentially, or at least give us an opinion every once in a while that we factor in, because maybe we have blinders on.
That would be a decent idea. To have a separate board as advisors that maybe aren't even Christians. And of course you can ignore them, like, because they're a separate board, but maybe they'd help you to see things better. I don't know if people will be willing to do that, but that's a cool idea. All right. It is definitely time, I am sure. I guess Travis and I will talk about whether we want to make this a whole other thing. Is the institution the problem? I don't think he's going to be able to convince me, but maybe. I don't think it's the institution that's the problem. Actually, it's a tendency. All right. Yeah, that's it. So 9:15. Thank you, Father, for bringing us all together. Keep us unified and make us people of character and health. We want to look like Jesus in our institutions or in our communities, wherever you put us in the world. Help us to look like you, Jesus. Amen. All right. I'm going to stick around for 8